Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Am I going crazy? Or did yesterday kind of suck? Like, really, really suck. I'm a guy that, in case you haven't been able to tell, religiously watches football. The only thing I watch more religiously than football games are cop dramas from the 1970s. I'm the person who is glued to his couch every football Sunday, the person who can't fathom people who don't watch football on that day, and can't stomach the idea of missing out on the action. I've seen tons and tons of football Sundays in my life, and sure, there have been plenty of Sundays that were better than others. There are some Sundays where I walk away disappointed at the overall slate of games, as there were only 3 or 4 games that were somewhat close. But yesterday was different. Yesterday felt off. It's been such an incredible season so far. Entering the day, 23 games had a game-winning score in the final minute of regulation or in overtime. That's an NFL record at this point in the season. We were bound to have a dud at some point. In the middle of an incredible season, we were bound to have the equivalent of a clip show episode. Yet, I can say this without a shred of recency bias, a shred of hyperbole, or a shred of exaggeration. Week 7 of the 2021 NFL season might have legitimately been the worst Sunday in the history of the NFL. I know what you're thinking. There's no way it was that bad. You're just saying that because every other week has had tons of nail-biters and thrillers, and this week felt like a huge letdown in comparison. No, I legitimately mean it, and I have the statistics to back it up. The stats might even shock you with just how bad it was, because you have to go way, way back to find a Sunday even remotely comparable to the one we just experienced. But for those of you who didn't get to witness what happened, or for those of you watching this in the future, here's a brief rundown of the Week 7 Sunday slate of games. Let's start with the good. We actually had an extremely tight game between the Atlanta Falcons and the Miami Dolphins. The odds makers had this one as a relative toss-up, and they were right. It was an insanely evenly matched game, with the Dolphins having 413 yards of offense compared to 397 for the Falcons. There was a fair amount of scoring, with 58 points being put on the Hard Rock Stadium scoreboard. The lead changed hands quite a few times, and we almost got what felt like a signature Atlanta choke job when, after leading 27-14 midway through the fourth quarter, Miami stormed all the way back to take a 28-27 lead, only for Atlanta to hit a 36-yard field goal as time expired to win the game in dramatic fashion, taking it by a final score of 30-28. That was a pretty good game. It wasn't the prettiest football game by any means, but I'm usually not complaining about any game decided on the final play that has multiple lead changes in the fourth quarter. That was the good. That was the only one-possession game of the entire day. Seriously. That was the only game all Sunday that was decided by 8 points or less. Every other game was, at its best, a 2-possession contest, and at its worst, was over by halftime. In the early slate, Tennessee beat Kansas City by 24, Green Bay beat Washington by 14, Cincinnati beat Baltimore by 24, the Giants beat Carolina by 22, and New England beat the Jets by 41, although it's debatable whether or not the Jets actually showed up to begin with. In the late slate, Las Vegas beat Philadelphia by 11, Los Angeles beat Detroit by 9 in a game that was admittedly way closer than most people thought, Tampa Bay beat Chicago by 35, and Arizona beat Houston by 26. And to wrap it all up, on Sunday Night Football, in a sloppy game played in even sloppier weather conditions, Indianapolis beat San Francisco by 12. One game decided by one possession, and only one other game within single digits. And truth be told, we haven't seen a week like that in a while. When you add up all the stats from Week 7 of the 2021 season, you have 5 games that were decided by 2 possessions or less, which comes out to just over 45%. The average margin of victory in these games was exactly 20 points, with the lowest margin being 2 points for the Falcons-Dolphins game, and the highest margin being 41 points for the Jets-Patriots game. The first thing you might be wondering is this: when was the last time we ever had a Sunday where only one game was decided by one possession? When was the last time we ever had a Sunday where seemingly every game was over before the final whistle sounded? Well, to find out the last time we had a Sunday afternoon slate like that, you have to go back to Week 7 of the 2009 season. That week, the only one-possession game in the afternoon slate was when the Houston Texans defeated the San Francisco 49ers 24-21. In fact, if you take out Sunday Night Football, that week was incredibly similar to this one. Much like in Week 7 of 2021, 5 out of the 12 games in Week 7 of 2009 were within 2 possessions, and the average margin of victory was even worse, with the margin being 22.4 points. So that should answer our question, right? This week was bad, but we've had worse, so let's stop exaggerating and just hold our horses for 1 second. Well, not quite. Because that's excluding Sunday Night Football. That's only including the Sunday afternoon slate. Turns out, the Sunday Night Football game was a one-possession contest, so that doesn't quite answer our question. That night, the Arizona Cardinals defeated the New York Giants 24-17 in a close contest, which ended after the Giants got the ball into Arizona territory inside the final 2 minutes, but couldn't capitalize. So if we're looking for the worst Sunday afternoon slate, we might not have to go back further than 2009. But if we're looking for the worst overall Sunday slate, where only one game was decided by one possession all day, we have to go back even more. And by even more, I mean outside of the 21st century. I only looked at the post-merger era for this, which is from 1970 to present. There are a few reasons for this. Number one, I'm looking at this from the fan viewing experience. If a fan wanted to do nothing on Sunday but watch the NFL all day, the only way to really do that was from 1970 on, when the merger happened and the NFL was airing on multiple networks with CBS and NBC, where you could watch an early game on one network and a late game on another network. Going before that, when you only got one game most of the time on one network, seems kind of pointless. And number two, there were a double-digit number of games most of these weeks in the post-merger era, whereas beforehand, we'd be dealing with weeks with 5 or 6 games, which defeats the point of the exercise. If you only have 5 games on a Sunday slate, of course there's a high probability that you'll have weeks where only one of them is a good game. If you have 12 games, that probability drops significantly. With that in mind, if you want to look at the last time that a Sunday slate of games only had one game decided by one possession, you have to go back 28 years to Week 7 of the 1993 season. I don't know what it is with Week 7, but that's a bizarre coincidence. Anyways, during that week, the only one-possession game was an AFC West battle between the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Diego Chargers, where the Chiefs won 17-14. However, that week was not worse than what just happened in 2021. That week, only 8 games were played, because the NFL experimented with a 2-bye-week system and did a horrible job at designing the schedule. But of those 8 games, 6 of them, or 75%, were decided by 2 possessions or less. And the average margin of victory was 13.9 points, more than 6 points better than the margin from Week 7 of 2021. But while we still haven't found a Sunday worse than what happened yesterday, at least we know the last time something similar happened. We only had to go back 28 years, before the Jaguars and Panthers were even teams, before anyone in the country knew who Ace of Base was, and before anyone was crying over the death of Mufasa. In fact, Week 7 in 1993 and Week 7 of 2021 are the only 2 times since 1976 that we only had one Sunday game decided by one possession. Since America's bicentennial, a Sunday this inept, this boring, and this unwatchable has only happened twice. And remember, when it happened in 1993, there were only 8 games. So Week 7 of 2021 was the first time since the bicentennial, since Star Wars was released, and since people were unironically listening to a Donald Duck disco impersonation on the radio, that an NFL Sunday had double-digit games, and only one of them was kept within one possession. At minimum, this was the worst NFL Sunday in 45 years. But was it the worst in the post-merger era? Well, there's some competition. This happened during Week 14 of the 1975 season. The New York Giants beat the San Francisco 49ers 26-23 in the only one-possession game of the day. And that game was ultimately meaningless, as the Giants were 4-9 and the 49ers were 5-8. So that game had no playoff implications whatsoever, which is kind of important if we're talking about the final week of the season. However, that week was still better than Week 7 of 2021. 7 of the 10 games played that day were within 2 possessions, which comes out to 70%. Remember that for Week 7 of 2021, our percentage was roughly 45%. And the average margin of victory was 14.3 points, where the average margin for Week 7 of 2021 was 6 points higher at 20. We have to keep going back. During Week 1 of the 1973 season, it's safe to say that football fans who were looking forward to a new year in the NFL were sufficiently disappointed afterwards, when only one of the 12 games played that day were decided by one possession. The lone one-possession game was when the Dallas Cowboys defeated the Chicago Bears 20-17. Oddly enough, I talked about that game in a previous video of mine, specifically with regards to an awful decision that Bears head coach Abe Gibron made late in the fourth quarter that cost his team the game. If you want to learn more about that, click the card in the upper right corner. However, the metrics still show that Week 7 of 2021 was worse, because 6 games, or 50%, were within 2 possessions, and the average margin of victory was 17.7 points. We have to keep going back. And to open up the 1970 season, we had a similar awful start to the year. The post-merger era got off to a whimper when the Baltimore Colts beat the San Diego Chargers 16-14 in the only one-possession game of the Sunday slate. However, 7 of the 10 games played that day, or 70%, were within 2 possessions, and the average margin of victory was 13.9 points. Week 7 of 2021 still has every other week in NFL history in the post-merger era beat. You could make a legitimate argument that this past Sunday was the worst of all time. However, there's still one more week that we have to talk about. There's one more week that we haven't mentioned yet that also comes from that 1970 season that might, just barely, save Week 7 of 2021 from living in total infamy. because the final week of the 1970 season, much like the first week, was dreadful. Week 14 of the 1970 season was billed to be incredibly high drama. It was so high drama, in fact, that there was a legitimate chance that by the end of the day, with the right results, the playoff picture could be decided by a coin flip. If you want to learn more about how the NFL was so incompetent that they nearly let a coin flip determine the playoff picture, then click the card in the upper right corner. What followed was anything but drama. It was an incredibly anticlimactic ending to what was shaping up to be a climatic season with a lot of great storylines. In a completely meaningless game, Washington beat St. Louis 28-27 in the only one-possession game. Of the 12 games played, only 3 of them were decided by 2 possessions or less, which comes out to an abysmal 25%. And the average margin of victory was 24.2 points, or 4 possessions. You had more games decided by 30 or more points than you had games decided by less than 20 points, just to give you an idea of how bad that week was. So if any week is going to save Week 7 of 2021 for being the worst week in NFL history, it's Week 14 of the 1970 season, but only just barely. Regardless, whatever your thoughts are, what happened on Sunday was a historically bad Sunday. It's one that hasn't been seen in 28 years or 46 years depending on which metric you use. It's one where no game outside of Falcons-Dolphins was close, relatively speaking. It's one that was so bad that CBS switched out to Titans-Chiefs in some markets because it was a 24-point blowout, only to switch to another game that ended in a 24-point blowout. Whatever the case, let's just hope that nothing like this happens again, because after a fantastic start to the season, what happened in Week 7 felt like the biggest letdown of the year. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9, and subscribe to 60-second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.